Hey, John Lamberton here. This is the Woodshed number 13, and today I wanted to talk about swing feel and sort of make a case for the boring, square, institutional definition of what swing is, because I don't think that means that we have to abandon any other notions of swing. There's a sort of purist pushback that a lot of jazz people will give you about how this standard definition of it isn't right, and it doesn't really they want to basically make the case that swing defies definition, but I think that this isn't helpful, and if we take the sort of institutional definition of it seriously, then it helps us really transcend swing feel in general and sort of enter a new conversation, which I think is interesting. So without further ado, let's get into it. But I would also like to invite anybody who has any sort of jazz musician in mind that they think is particularly a great example of swing feel, or doesn't even have to be a jazz musician. It could be like New Jack Swing artists. It could be country western artists. Whoever has a swing feel that you think is a great exemplar of this sort of particular way of playing rhythmically. And so if you have anything like that in mind, let me know in the comments. What I'd like to do in a future video is basically take some of these examples and just take a fine-tooth comb to them, or take a microscope to the waveform and look at these transients and where exactly they fall, so maybe we can gain some insight into how different swing feels exactly differ. If we look at these under a microscope, we can learn something about it. And so I don't see why we shouldn't do that. So first of all, what is the definition of swing? Well, you could sort of just define it by listening to it. And, so that means listen to John Coltrane, listen to Miles Davis, listen to Cannonball Adderley, listen to whoever you think is swing music, or, listen to bebop, listen to hard bop, and hear how these different musics have different inflections of this sort of general, rhythmic idea. But, while everybody's going to have their own sort of signature on how they play swing, I think the underlying structure of it is generally the same. And so it's basically to just say that it's a triplet feel. And so generally speaking, this comes up as a notational shortcut. So if you get a chart that has a bunch of eighth notes over it, if at the top it says eighth note equals, quarter note, eighth note with a triplet bracket, it's basically saying those two eighth notes should be treated as a triplet feel where the first two notes are one quarter note. So da 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 becomes da 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 da. So instead of having a 1-to-1 ratio, it's going to be a 2-to-1 ratio. And so this gets some pushback from the purists, and that's because it's sort of a quantifiable, maybe a reductionistic way of looking at it, that I think it gets most of the job done in terms of describing what the exact feel is. But people want to tell you that, like, this person has a different feel than this person has a different feel than this person. Coltrane and Cannonball have totally different feels, but they both swing their asses off. And that's true. And so regardless of what sort of rhythmic scheme you're in, you can have your own sort of way of handling the grid. And, some people like Jack DeJohnette will play with a very sort of off the grid sense of swing, while somebody else like Tony Williams might play a little bit more on the grid. And there's nothing wrong with either of them, but I think that at the end of the day, this triplet conversion is actually a pretty helpful notion for us. And so, other than the notational shortcut, the feel aspect of it, they want it to be a black box where, it's kind of like only the jazz authorities can tell you who swings and who doesn't. But, at the end of the day, like, there are a bunch of different types of swing too. It's not just jazz swing, but you could have New Jack Swing. You could have country western swing. You could have, hard bop versus bebop, and they all have different feels. And a lot of this has to do generally with the tempo and the type of content in the music. But, for instance, if you listen to Countdown by John Coltrane, you might be like, oh yeah, he's swinging his ass off, but it almost feels as if it's like straight eighth notes. But that's because it's so fast that, first of all, it's extremely difficult to execute it with the mechanical 2-to-1 rhythm that you get from the triplet conversion. But also, if you did that perfectly, you might still perceive it as a little bit more smoothed out and even, because that's super fucking fast. And so, to fit those notes in there that way with a swing feel, according to if you listen to some sort of raunchy, dirty blues that's really slow and wanky, it's going to really lean into that triplet feel in a structural way. But when you're doing Countdown at a gazillion beats per minute, you don't really have that ability anymore. It's each quarter note is so fast. If you're at 200 beats per minute, it's going to be really hard to fit a super mechanical swing feel in there. And I think if you did and you executed it convincingly, I think it would be pretty happening. I think it would be pretty swinging. So, basically, as you speed it up, it's going to sound smoother, and you're going to have the tendency to play it smoother as a musician. And by smoother, I mean more evenly. But what's interesting is there's this idea also of the Sibelius swing slider. And so it's kind of like, how hard do you want to swing? So that's an interesting way to think of it, as a spectrum. If you have straight eighth notes over here, and then you have the triplet feel over here, either way, it's 2 notes, 1 plus 1 versus 2 plus 1, where the 2 and the 3 are fit in the same space. So, you could do things between that. You could do 4 to 3. And so that would require a sort of septuplet conversion instead of the triplet conversion. So you can apply the same triplet conversion idea in a way that no longer is about triplets, it's about septuplets or quintuplets. And this enters a whole new world of new types of swing geometries that we can look at. And to sort of dismiss it as missing the point or incorrect is well, I don't know, if you have something that does 80% of the work in describing something, that's a good amount of the work. And so if instead you want to have your definition of swing be purely this formless, undefinable thing that you can only get from listening to records enough, then I don't know, it's not that helpful. So, an implication of this sort of triplet conversion thing, if we take it seriously, that people don't really appreciate, I don't think, is that for any given tempo, you're fitting 50% more subdivisions, and you're still fitting 2 notes per beat if you're doing eighth notes, but the subdivision of that, of the triplet grid versus the straight eighth note grid, it's a full 50% faster. And so this is, another sort of grossly reductive way to look at it, but it's basically any given tempo that you're playing at is going to be 50% faster or 50% more difficult in some ways to play swing on, And I say this, you're still playing an average of 2 notes, and maybe you want to sort of just fit them in there with your magical swing feel, however. But for me, when I feel the best about my swing feel, in the sort of triplet-y sense of it, is when I have, been shedding and I do a triplet subdivision and I can blow triplets over a given tempo. If everything that you do is conceived of as 2-note pairs per beat instead of the triplet, then it's kind of you're essentially hoping that you can lift the weights that you want to in the heat of the moment, instead of, having practiced for it and then feeling oh, this is easy, I can totally manage this. And then it's easy to get that swing feel to just sit in the groove nicely. But, if we don't approach it this way, if we just keep on trying to conceive of it as, oh, it's still 2 notes, but they're different, and I can't tell you how they're different, then it doesn't really do anything for us. And so basically, I would invite you to, while practicing, any given tempo, try to switch it to a triplet feel. That means the subdivision is 50% faster, which once you can get there, you will probably feel locked in and you're grooving and you have a good swing feel. Another thing is, I don't understand why there's this sort of fetishization of music from the 30s or music from the 50s or music from the 60s, because these days in jazz music, some of the hippest people are people that aren't really playing swing feel whatsoever. Like they might be playing entirely straight feel. It might sound more like bossa nova. And so it's like, when jazz musicians who usually would swing play bossa nova, like I feel like so now they suddenly don't swing. And so there's the idea of swing maybe in a sort of more generic sense where it's like just a general positive adjective, like this is a super swinging record, like you would say super killing or whatever, to throw some jazz terminology out there. But you might hear somebody playing totally straight and somebody would be like, yeah, they swing their ass off. And on a structural level, it's like, no, they aren't swinging whatsoever, but it's more like, oh yeah, this is a good rhythmic feel. And so the thing is, when people have this black box notion of, swing being sort of like this undefinable thing, I feel like that's just somebody having their own way of managing the grid or their own way of, negotiating time. And you can do that regardless. You can do that with a super strict triplet grid or, no grid whatsoever. I guess this is the sort of, signature of an individual's approach to playing time. The thing is, most of the hip jazz these days, will be sort of oftentimes straight, but it might be odd meter stuff. It might be this kind of like hip hop infused, it's basically referencing something that was unquantized, like something that's doing Dilla worship, like, worshiping Jay Dilla's rhythmic grooves, which were notoriously kind of broken feeling. And I would go as far as to say that is swing, even though it's not technically swing. But if we take this sort of idea of a triplet conversion seriously, it doesn't have to be a triplet. You could do, if you say eighth note equals, then you have a septuplet where the first four notes are one and then the second three notes are another. That's still a long, short feel, but that's going to be a lot more broken sounding and kind of more Dilla-esque, where it's like, instead of 2-1, it's 4-3. And you could even do 3-1, where it's going to be this like super sharp da 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 da. And these are all just like very particular micro rhythmic inflections. And so why not just transcend the whole notion of swing and move beyond it in a way that includes all old swing, but that allows us to sort of, treat it differently. For instance, I was practicing last night and I was thinking, I could practice the swing feel with the polymetric metronome. So like I set it to 4 against 3 or then, like 6 against 4, and you can sort of hear the triplet grid nicely. But then, if you are doing multiples of 3, say you have 12, what's very close to 12 is 11. So if you do, 12 over 4 versus 11 over 4, those are actually pretty similar, but one's going to be a slight bit more angular. And so it's still almost as processed as swing, I would say. So why not sort of explore these different avenues of different grids that we try to play accurately, instead of having sort of like the opportunity to throw shade at people's feel without having any quantified notion of what is wrong with it. So yeah, this is just a hot take on swing feel. So let me know if you have any questions, and if you enjoy the video, do please subscribe or like, etc., to help with the algorithm. And if you have any favorite swing feels, let me know. Any sort of example that you can point me toward, I'd like to take a look at it and see exactly what that sort of rhythmic inflection looks like under the microscope. So thanks for watching. Bye.